Please be seated. And here come the kids. What up, guys? In the southwest part of England, there's a place called Glastonbury. And on a hill there at Glastonbury, there used to be a tree that they called the Glastonbury thorn. It was a hawthorn tree. And the reason we know about this tree is that it did something very unusual. Hawthorn trees are supposed to bloom in the springtime, in April or May, and that's what this tree did. But it also bloomed in December, right around Christmas time. Now, we now know that this is a special subspecies of hawthorn, and scientists can tell us all sorts of things about its genetics and all sorts of fancy stuff like that. But our ancestors didn't know any of that stuff. All they knew was that this tree, out on this hillside beaten by the wind, bloomed in the middle of winter when things are not supposed to bloom. That tree isn't there anymore. People cut it down a long time ago. But before they did, other people had taken little cuttings from it and planted them secretly in churchyards and other places around Glastonbury. So there are still trees like that first one that bloom in the middle of the wintertime. And like our ancestors, we get to be amazed by this tree that blooms at the darkest, dreariest time of the year. Our ancestors had lots of legends about that original tree on the hillside in Glastonbury, but what all of those legends came to do was to point, just like our reading from the prophet Isaiah did this morning, towards Jesus. They saw the tree that bloomed in the dark and the dreary winter, and they saw it as a sign of the coming of Christ into our lives. And even with all of our fancy scientific understanding about that tree, we're still left to be amazed by the fact that this tree does this. And it still, for us, stands as a reminder that God comes into our lives in surprising ways. Not at the right time, not in April or May when we're looking for it, but in the middle of December when it's cold and nobody in their right mind would be out looking for a tree in bloom. God doesn't come into our lives always in the ways that we're expecting or the ways we want. But if our eyes are open, we will see God at work, especially in those surprising ways. And if we open up our ears, we will hear God calling us to go be surprising signs of love in the lives of others too. That's what Advent's about. It's about reminding us of that surprise, of how God comes into our lives when we're not expecting it, and about how God sends us to go out and embody that surprising love for others. Let's go get a stamp. What then did you go out to see? That's the question Jesus asks of us today. It's such an important question that he asks it 3 separate times. We established last week that the call given to us during Advent is to learn to see with new eyes, to turn around and look again. But what are we looking for? Jesus makes it clear that it isn't enough to turn around and look in the right direction. We then need to start looking for the right thing. The prophet tells us that when God comes, the desert will bloom. And echoing the prophet, Jesus tells us that the blind receive their sight, the lame walk, the lepers are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the poor have good news brought to them. Now, as we look at the world around us, it probably doesn't seem as if those conditions are being met, at least not very well. And it probably wasn't all that clear to Jesus' disciples or the disciples of John the Baptist either. But Jesus assures us all that it is indeed happening. Maybe the problem is that we're looking for the wrong thing. Or maybe we are still looking in the wrong way or in the wrong place. We want God to work on our terms, and we want to find the signs of God's presence in a way that fits our image of God. But we are called to learn to see God as God is, and not as we want God to be. And if we want to see God as God is, then we ought to go looking in the right place. The testimony of Scripture is clear. If you want to encounter God, if you want to see God at work, then the best place to go is out into the wilderness. Now, I'm not talking about fishing for a couple of hours down on the Tennessee River or taking a hike up Montesano. Those moments in nature are good things, but I'm not talking about nature. I'm talking about wilderness. I'm talking about the place where life is vulnerable. The place where life is tenuous at its best. The place where food and water are scarce and we are exposed to attacks from wild beasts and where we can easily get ourselves lost. I'm talking about the place where it is just plain dangerous to be. That is where we need to go if we want to see God at work. Literal wilderness, like deserts or jungles, is certainly a dangerous place. But we don't have to go on long journeys into the backcountry in order to find wilderness. There's a different kind of wilderness that's quite close to us. Right in our own backyards, people are starving to death. Right here close to us in our own communities, people are trying to survive without adequate medical care, without proper shelter, without any real safety in their lives. The world in which we live might look like civilization, but we still live in a dangerous and vulnerable place. The promise of God that we hear in Scripture is true, but it doesn't come with flash and pizzazz, and it doesn't come on our terms. God does things in God's own way. The desert will indeed bloom. All of those wondrous acts of healing and renewal that Jesus mentions will occur. But they will happen slowly and quietly. And they will happen in places of vulnerability and danger, not in places of comfort and ease. God calls us once again out of our comfort and into the wilderness, calls us out to watch. Because even now, God is acting. Our poem this morning is by Rainer Maria Rilke. It is called Onto a Vast Plain. You are not surprised at the force of the storm. You have seen it growing. The trees flee. Their flight sets the boulevards streaming, and you know he whom they flee is the one you move toward. All your senses sing him as you stand at the window. The weeks stood still in summer. The tree's blood rose. Now you feel it wants to sink back into the source of everything. You thought you could trust that power when you plucked the fruit. Now it becomes a riddle again, and you again a stranger. Summer was like your house. You know where each thing stood. Now you must go out into your heart as onto a vast plain. Now the immense loneliness begins. The days go numb. The wind sucks the world from your senses like withered leaves. Through the empty branches, the sky remains. It is what you have. Be earth, now and evensong. Be the ground lying under that sky. Be modest now, like a thing ripened until it is real, so that he who began it all can feel you when he reaches for you.